Efficiency Unlocked is hosted by two tech-savvy physicians and dear friends of mine, Drs. Adam Karu and Dale Gold, who are experts in using technology to automate routine tasks and increase efficiency in everyday and business life. Let's see what they have for us today.
Stay tuned for this series of episodes where we'll be discussing the game-changing impact of AI in the realm of patient care and physician well-being.
Get ready to unlock efficiency with NerdMDs.
Efficiency Unlocked.
So technology is not really taking the waste out. And if we apply GPT and LLMs in the right way, the question is, will we finally be able to crack the code and starting to reduce the proportion of healthcare spend that's actually waste-related?
That was Dr. Alistair Erskine, the Chief Information and Digital Officer at Emory Healthcare. Dr. Erskine is a physician leader who has extensive experience in digital transformation, clinical informatics, and brought an early adoption mindset for generative AI to Emory. He has worked at various large-scale health systems across the world, including in Qatar, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts, and joined Emory just a little over a year ago. He's also a sailor and a fan of fun, rocket-like electric cars. In this episode, I take a backseat listening role due to the worst laryngitis ever imagined. So my co-nerd host, Dale, will talk with Alistair about his journey and the inspiration behind his current role, his vision of building a digitally enabled, integrated academic health system, and his insights for how generative AI can revolutionize healthcare. The NerdMDs thank Dr. Erskine for taking time out of his busy schedule to share his early learnings and understandings of generative AI with all of you. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to the show. Our first question is your origin story. Can you share with us your journey and the inspiration behind your current role? What was your why and how has it shaped the vision of your health system?
So, hey, and thank you for having me. So I would say that I never intended to get into the digital space. I'm an internal medicine and pediatric physician and came out of residency as a hospitalist, seeing patients in one hospital and internal medicine patients, in another hospital. As I kept using the various different tools that we do in clinical practice, it struck me that they seemed to be oddly configured for what I heard they could do. And, I went to my respective bosses and I said, somebody needs to fix this. And they said, well, why don't you fix it? And I was kind of curious, especially after this one day I was sitting down watching one of the clerks on the unit take a recycle bin and approximate it to a printer. And she was removing reams of paper off of the printer and put it directly into the recycle bin. And I said, what are you doing? She said, this damn thing 3 times a day, I got to fill it full of paper and change the toner because you got all these things that nobody ever reads that comes off this thing. I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Did a back of the envelope calculation, found out that we were spending $1 million in paper alone across the entire organization as we were printing this stuff out. So I went to the informatics committee. I was very proud of myself. I thought, okay, I'm going to show, ROI. And I said, the first thing we could do is just turn this stuff off and save all this money on paper. And somebody said, we can't do that. Patients will die. And I thought, oh, I'm hooked. This is interesting. The perception of what happens in a meeting, the reality of what happens on the front line, the perception of how you configure systems, the reality of how those systems manifest on the front line as they're incorporated into the clinical practice and the hurly-burly of clinical care, the pager going off and somebody calling you, are just two different environments. And you need a double agent that can sit on the edge of both, help and translate and solution architect and describe, what's going on. And so that's really kind of how I started my journey. And having done that on the clinical side, it turns out a very similar thing was happening on the research side. Same story, people are paper-based, using Excel spreadsheets to do their work, and there were other systems that could be done, need to be better configured. So basically was gotten involved in the transformation side, digital transformation side on the research side. And then I speak French and Spanish fluently, so I got pulled into other countries describing how informatics works and so forth, and stumbled in the Middle East in Qatar on a system that wanted to build the entire thing from scratch. So we didn't have to make the mistakes that we had learned for decades, and we could just build the whole system, unlimited budget. That was a really interesting program. And with that unlimited budget, we made an unlimited number of mistakes and basically took a lot of, I would say, the mindsets that existed from 10 to 20 years ago, who are folks that were consulted in the Middle East, and apply that to those hospitals. So that was, I don't think we achieved as much as we could have achieved. When I came back, I learned a lot about value-based care from an organization called Geisinger Health in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. And it is a fantastic, innovative system that is half of a health plan, half of a clinical enterprise. And you would have conversations, and you would always have the health plan, at the table, literally in those conversations, trying to understand how to deal with patients who are both patients and members at the same time, and things that you could do. A lot of innovation came out of Geisinger. I ended up going to Boston to do MIT executive MBA program for a couple of years, and then got recruited to Mass General Brigham. And at the Mass General Hospital and the Brigham and Women's Hospital, ran sort of the Epic and other systems. I learned a lot about the how to do clinical trials and how to manipulate data in order to, and all kinds of different types of data, not obviously just EHR data, but everything else you can think of. And then the importance of using these systems and data assets in the cloud to be able to manage this at scale. And then finally, less than a year ago, I was able to come to Emory as the Chief Information and Digital Officer to an extraordinary organization that had underinvested in its technology for a little while, but had just put in a fresh minted copy of Epic. And so it was a great opportunity to unbox that system post go live and activate all the things around it that makes it successful, and then continuing that journey that we're on now. So it's another clinical, digital, and financial transformation of the organization. As we're doing way beyond electronic health record things, we're also doing financial platform things, trying to approximate, just like a CMIO was somebody who's helping a digital IT department understand how to configure technology on the clinical side. We actually now have a CFIO, who is someone who is helping, who's a physician helping unfrag the financial and revenue cycle and activity-based cost inside of the house as well, ERP, all those kinds of things. So there's really kind of the next stage of thinking about, how to use informatics, this concept of sort of, the double agent on the clinical side, the research side, the financial side, population health management side, and that's been a fantastic journey.
No, I love that. And I think that, you've taken it from that informatics stage, and then, like you said, at this point, it's going to other roles that didn't typically have physicians in them, and bringing that clinical eye to it. I've always looked at that from afar and thought that only makes sense in the healthcare setting to have that knowledge as the background. Did you always know that, leadership was for you? In this story, it sort of seems like, that paper, got you on this path, maybe as a hobby at first. Like, was leadership always in your path?
Never intended leadership to be a path. In fact, quite the opposite. In fact, I haven't seen patients now for 5 years, and I desperately miss it. And the reason I stopped seeing patients is because I was afraid I would hurt somebody with doing 20% or less of my clinical time. I got to the point where I really became worried about that. So what I do instead to satisfy my clinical itch is every Monday and Friday I round in the hospital, in the clinic, somewhere in the pharmacy, whatever it may be, to be able to experience what does a surgeon go through, what does an OB go through, because my understanding has to be much broader than internal medicine and pediatrics. And the way to do that is to actually sit at the front line with a clinician or nurse or APP doing the same thing. What's been great is I actually bring my digital team with me. My assistant comes along with me with an iPhone on a gimbal, and basically the rest of my digital team, could be 100, 200 folks, are live streaming that experience as I'm learning about what are we doing in proton therapy, what are we doing in the cancer regimen and so forth. And they get to understand and learn just as the way that I am, and they're better prepared then to configure the system.
Yeah, I heard that on a recent podcast, and I thought that was so interesting. And, it had me thinking of, we're always looking for technological ways to make something more efficient. And I was just thinking as I was listening to that podcast, I don't think that's one you could use technology to get the same results as you do by doing that in person with your team. I thought that sounded really interesting.
Yes.
No, that's great. I mean, taking that further, obviously, the credibility that you have in seeing different healthcare systems in different spaces in different countries. What we're talking about on this series to get started is generative AI. What was your first personal experience with generative AI? How long have you known about it? And, when did you first connect the dots towards, how we apply this to healthcare, especially in a transformational way?
So I'm smiling, even though you can't see that on the podcast, but Keith Dreyer, who's one of my colleagues and friends at Mass General Brigham, who is a chief data science officer and is doing great work in the data science space, has been for many years. We were both trying to learn more about this thing that had just been announced in like November of 2022. And finally, got our hands on, ChatGPT, and went online and started using it. And I remember starting, and about 5 hours went by, before I looked back up again, and I pulled my mouth off the floor and put it back into my jaw, as I was stunned about the things that was thrown at it and what it was coming back with. This is, at the time, this is 3.0, which now people scoff at not being enough, data. But it was, the possibilities were just endless. And so that was the initial, experience of it. And I'd say since then, it's been a really interesting development, as there's been some great use cases. Probably the most useful one and transformational one has been the ambient listening aspect, where you have a clinical conversation between a patient and a doctor, and within a minute or so, that conversation is converted to text, and then that generates a clinical note. And that's been fantastic. We also use it today to better manage the in-basket. So there's an automatic reply when somebody sends a message of that message, and you can edit it or delete it or do what you want with it, but at least it's a start. But the challenge with it has been every company has a product now that is augmented by generative AI, and sometimes it's useful and sometimes it's useless. And it's becoming harder and harder to tell the difference between the two without really getting into the details. The thing is so magical. You stick it on top of crap, and it still makes it magical crap, which is still interesting. And so I think it is going to become harder to tease out who's just taken a large language model and just wrapped a little API product around it versus who's taken a large language model and really done something unique and differentiating that's actually helpful, especially to the front line or to wherever it may be. So that's a new challenge ahead of us.
Yeah, speaking of, you're live with a bunch of these at this point. We talked about before air that you've got 500 physicians, using this technology today. Clearly that means that you were fast to act in this space, and, you knew what you were looking for and figured out how to pick it out. It's a difficult situation for all of us. Do you build something? Do you partner with someone who has that add-on? Do you bring someone else in? What did you, in that process, when you were thinking about this so early, use as some of the criteria you were using to make decisions on where you would make your first start?
So some of my colleagues will say I was reckless for going for an enterprise-wide, subscription or licensing of the tool at such an early stage without any evidence that it was actually going to be helpful. But again, having experienced 6 months prior, pulling my jaw off the floor and spending 5 hours in front of ChatGPT, I knew it didn't really matter exactly how the product functioned. What I needed to make sure is the science was there, that the people who were producing this had published papers and understood exactly kind of how to tweak and modify the system, and that the company was not too big, not too small, and a Goldilocks company of sort of a Series B kind of, that I was going to be able to truly partner with, and continue to help co-develop the product. And I wanted to be something that was technology light, software as a service, without having to do a whole lot of shenanigans with Citrix servers and so forth. And so for me, I found the right partner in that regard and decided to go, both feet all in. And to me, it was more the design, not to be reckless, but to be bold. I knew it was going to be transformational. I knew that I was writing my own history with how I partnered with this company, and I thought I had the right partner. And just, it's panned out in spades. But it could have been a very different story. I could have completely picked the wrong horse and ended up in a mess and having to kind of, and also there were ways in the contract to sort of de-risk that. So there were ways that we could sort of negotiate things out if that was ever an issue, and that manifests not to have been an issue. And since then, I'm kind of doing more holding back before I expand until I have all the tools that I need to be able to really go at scale, which is a good problem to have.
I can relate. I think that I've been pushing in this space as well, and luckily my wife doesn't listen to this podcast, but in the very early days, she definitely was jealous of ChatGPT and said, go ask your girlfriend this question instead of me, because I would just use it to any question and see what it would say. And I think along the same lines, I'm pushing in the ambient AI space myself, and I can relate to how you approach that and those challenges of going early that you faced. Speaking of that, you've learned more than most of us being so deep in the space, and it's something that I use today, and I know that it's amazing and not perfect at the same time. As we figure things out, what are some of the biggest surprises where you would have some caution that maybe this is not perfect for X, Y, and Z, even though we thought so today? Anything you could share, others who are just dipping their toe in this space?
Yeah, so I'll tell you some of the ways I use the tool is things like job descriptions, or denial letters, or ideas on a talk, or stuff like that. I mean, those are some of the practical things. I think that the first thing is, as everybody has discovered, hallucinations are a problem because they're spoken or written with such firm confidence that it's hard to tease out from the rest of what's being converted or being described. So I tend not to use one. I don't use OpenAI only. I'll go to Claude 2 and Bard and try. If I'm looking for something, it's almost like I'm trying it in three different versions of large language models and trying to triangulate into what I'm looking for. That helps engineer out some of the hallucinations that I would otherwise see. And they all offer their own, kind of domain. Claude tends to be a bit more kind of EQ savvy than the others. I would say, the OpenAI, the GPT tends to be kind of more comprehensive in its responsive, and Bard tends to be up to date, in terms of what it's telling you. So there's a nice way to kind of engineer out some of those problems. I think the at least what I've found is that it will get you a certain way there, like you can get an outline or something out of it, but you got to do the rest. You got to put meat on the bone if you really want to do something different. So it's not the end all be all. To your point, it really is. You ask it certain questions, and as you kind of go backwards and forwards, and some of the answers are just not useful. There's a lot of prompt engineering you can do to make those answers a lot more useful. And in GPT in particular, people should definitely look at plugins. It's almost like an app store for generative AI, and those plugins can really enhance the output depending upon what you're looking for. And so that's been very, very helpful. I think in terms of other surprises, when you have these these technologies, and I remember, in 2015, somebody said that blockchain was going to revolutionize healthcare. That everything was going to go on blockchain, and people got really excited about blockchain, and it sort of came and sort of petered out. And then, whatever the next, thing du jour was, this one felt different right from the beginning. It felt like it wasn't going to be a fly-by-night technology that was going to kind of go up and down the hype curve and then disappear in the middle of the night. There was something truly different about it, and I think that's panned out. I think it's been quite different. What's really interesting is, okay, now what? Where does it go from here? And where to best apply it? Where to make sure that you don't take the entire patient database and stick it in a public, environment. So how to make sure that you keep the information private. The other one, this past weekend, I actually was playing around with Copilot Studio that has just come out, and I found out that in about 15 minutes, I created a complete chatbot that could speak any number of different languages on the Emory Healthcare website, where I could say things like, my shoulder hurts, who should I go see? And it would give me booking details and links to the orthopedic clinic. And that's just by pointing, Copilot Studio to the website. And it clearly read the whole entire website, absorbed it, and then I had this natural language interface to be able to interact with it. But 15 minutes to do that?
That's amazing.
Yeah. The applications are, it really, your imagination is your limit. And the question is, okay, so what's the implication? Because despite the fact that we've had all this great technology added to healthcare, the percent of waste remains steady at 30%. So healthcare keeps growing, but the $1 trillion of waste keeps growing with it. So technology is not really taking the waste out. And if we apply GPT and LLMs in the right way, the question is, will we finally be able to crack the code and starting to reduce the proportion of healthcare spend that's actually waste related?
Yeah, and I think that is probably why I think we're all so happy about the documentation solutions, because there's just so much waste in that space. As I experienced it today, being able to just listen to the patient's story and connect and not take notes on that, was just such a cognitive burning relief that I can just focus and not worry about not taking good enough notes or not jotting down the exact date that they said for something, and then I see the results and all the dates are perfect. Of course, as a physician, the side of the body is perfect, which is always the hardest to remember. Was it left or right? I can only imagine what we can do with that space that we're saving of cognitive load and what we can do with it. I'm curious, what's your perspective on that? Future state. We're kind of here today with generative AI, but how could you see it transforming the healthcare industry in the future beyond just optimizing the current system, but helping us with a future system?
Today we expect people to check boxes when it comes to patient safety and patient quality, because that's the best way we have to do that. And it actually adds a burden. It's important to do, but it adds a burden of having to collect that information. The thing I like about these passive technologies that listen is the fact that you can actually collect that as a byproduct without interrupting the relationship between a patient and a clinician. Think about the OR and the medical black box in the OR. So put something like ambient listening in the OR. It's going to listen to timeout. It's going to listen to how many sponges were disposed. It's going to listen to which instruments we use. It's going to listen to the time that the surgeon actually started the surgery, what happened during the surgery, when it closed the surgery. It can create that debrief note within minutes of the end of the operation, something that doesn't happen 100% of the time when a surgeon's busy and has to run to the next case. And that could be very valuable in terms of people knowing what happened in the OR. It could be very valuable in terms of avoiding denials from pre-certification from one procedure that actually changed and shifted to another procedure during the OR, and you still want to get paid without having to redo the pre-authorization. So there's that aspect of saying, how do I now track things that are going to feel much more natural, but the sort of documenter is embedded, And so I don't have to sit there and manually document these things. I think that's one aspect. And I'm giving that as an example. There are probably endless additional examples of that could manifest.
Yeah, I love that too. I have trouble sometimes zooming my head out big enough to understand what the world looks like when, just as you described, we're getting more accurate data. If you have that throughout a whole health system where all of the data is more accurate and eventually more discrete, what can we do with all of that is just mind-boggling, knowing that, how we do things today is very much reliant on, humans putting that right information in versus what you described. If that's done at scale and, you have experience rolling these technologies out at a large scale, I think you can do a lot with that. And it's hard to predict what that looks like, having that much accurate information, what you could do with it in a good way.
I think the areas that don't get as much attention, supply chain, general ledger, accounts receivable, they sit at the precipice of a lot of inefficiency, manual work, tribal knowledge of people having to learn how to work with all the different payers as you thread the needle to get compensated for the work that you actually did. There's a lot of opportunity in automation there. There's a lot of opportunity to help people who otherwise have to do remedial work actually have tools like this do it for them, and to identify and optimize what we can't see today. Where is the cost driver? Where is the actual margin? Can these tools help us better identify that? I think those are other dimensions that we talk less about, but are really important to the waste equation.
That's a great point. In terms of next-gen healthcare, how do you envision building a digitally enabled, integrated academic health system that can leverage the strengths of both AI and physician-led teams?
So, the beauty of an academic medical center is its tripartite mission. And the fact that with those three missions, which are expensive missions, clinical care may generate revenue. You have to support the community and charity care, in order to kind of maintain the not-for-profit status. But then you have to pay for the education that you're supporting. That doesn't obviously come as free. And even though there's research dollars flowing in from NIH and other sponsored programs, you still end up having, at the end of the day, pay for that research to be done, despite the direct and indirect fees and so forth. So the mission is, if it just comes down to having three disconnected missions, I don't think the synergy will really be obtained. What makes more sense is to take all the functions that are existing from researchers and from educators and from clinical care and abstract that in a currency of data that can be insight can be driven out of it from generative AI to return that back into workflow of the folks that are doing. So that's the ideal scenario. We have a unified data ecosystem that is pulling all these transactional data that is able to then, in some cases, ideally in the future, self-organize it, where we don't have to have data models and relational systems to figure out how the data is organized, but instead we have more graph models, just like how LLMs are organized, and then be able to query and ask questions or push things back into workflow. Imagine a patient access center that would automatically create decision trees based on what kind of orthopedic doctors, for example, you had in your system, instead of discreetly having to pick each and every decision tree and then change it and kind of keep it up to date as people leave and people come and new services are being offered. Trying to get in between there. So to try to get an academic medical system to be as kind of a learning system that is constantly improving itself without necessarily having humans tweaking every single little tactical detail, that would be an amazing system. What I think we have at Emory, which I think is quite unique, is unlike other academic medical centers have kind of gotten further apart. In some cases, even the health system is split off and had the university on one side and the health system on the other side. There's a deep commitment to go in the exact opposite way. So there's a lot of work being done right now at Emory to converge. And in fact, from a digital perspective, instead of buying two systems, one for the university, one for this, and we're actively buying one that goes across. Instead of getting a chief digital and analytic officer for the health system, Joe Deppa is the chief data officer for the entire organization, kind of with actually two roles and both sides of the ledger that is one person. So that convergence is designed to tap into the synergy that is supposed to occur in an academic medical center that has a bit of a Byzantine business model where the healthcare side has to pay for the education and research piece, or the endowment and the donations have to pay for the research and education piece. But that virtuous cycle of knowledge and data and likely generative AI going back into workflow is how the system of the future needs to function.
Yeah, I love that. Sign me up for that future for sure. To piggyback on that idea a little bit, when we talk about the physicians leading that space, and something that was interesting on that recent podcast you did, I was interested to hear that recently when you were setting things up there, you brought in, I think it was 18 informatics FTE into the team, and obviously you're a clinician in a information and digital role. At this point with your experience, you've obviously gotten good at building some of those cases. What is some of your approaches when you come to helping people understand that value? I know it's something that you've expressed that you see the value, but how do you help other people see it?
No, it's a really, really important question. It's a really important question now because margins are razor thin. Premium labor is erasing our margins. The inflation and supply costs are erasing the margins. Hospitals were already on thin margins as it was. So, you can't be cavalier at all about how you think through a ROI calculation. The ROIs are not 5 years now. There's the request is not only for positive ROI, but also for it to start delivering within 18 months, or 12 months. And so saying, I'm going to take 18 physicians out of clinical practice that are otherwise generating revenue, and I'm going to put them into this, other environment where they're advising on digital and so forth. You got to make a business case for that. So I think, there's soft and hard ROI. There's good data out there, reasonably good data comes out of Arch Collaborative that says that if you class is Arch Collaborative, if you actually have these physician specialists that can build in the system, you end up with a more productive, happier set of clinicians. Well, boy, doesn't that make sense? I'm a urologist. I sit there, I have to use the internal medicine CMIO's, screens, and I can modify those screens and turn them into urology screens. I'm going to be a lot happier, and my colleagues are going to be a lot happier too. So that kind of makes a lot of sense. But much more important than that is these systems aren't cheap. And if you buy a Ferrari and stick it in the garage and don't put gas in it, there's not a lot of value in that. So if we're going to buy these big mega systems that are very dependent to being, kind of fit into that particular organization's culture and habits and systems and so forth, you're going to need somebody to solution architect that together, and somebody to help bring everybody else along to understand how to use it, how to configure it. So it's a little bit of saying we need a portion of the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being spent on the software to also be spent on the folks that are forever optimizing that software. And the best people to do that are double agents that are basically half time using it and then half time actually configuring it. That works reasonably well. Now, how do you show that it's working? Usually you show it's working by, I'm now able to see more patients in the outpatient space. I'm now able to see lower length of stay incrementally because of better efficiency through the operating rooms and through the inpatient space and through the emergency department. I'm better able to code E&M visit levels because the note's more comprehensive. I'm able to see more, I'm able to reduce my cost on supply because I'm doing strategic sourcing, or because I'm reducing my PAR levels because I have a better handle on my supply, or I'm reducing my errors and problems because I'm not. I still can identify where the expired products are and take them out of circulation before they are accidentally put into a patient or something like that. So those are the more hard ROI ways of doing things, I think. But it can't be done without the double agents.
Yeah, no, I love that insight. And, I think we all know that that's such a hard place we're all in this space. So hearing someone else, share the same things that we're all thinking and put it out there is going to be really helpful. I want to bring it back one more time to ambient AI documentation. You have a lot of experience in this space, and you've had a lot of providers give feedback on this space. Where are you at in looking at this near-term landscape on ambient AI documentation for your practice? Where are you going next? Where are you now? What are the things you would share from your learnings?
Yeah, so I think the good news is there's going to be interest from the clinician community. And I say that on purpose, meaning nurse in, pharmacist, social worker, and doctor. But so there's going to be interest because there's some people that are going to have a narrative aspect or whatever they're doing, and it will be nice to have a system kind of summarize that for them. I think that, and at the same time, there'll be people who are perfectly suited for it who will have no interest in it for any kinds of number of sometimes reasonable or even preference reasons, and I think that's okay. I don't think anybody should be forced to use generative AI ambient listen if they don't want to. If they want to keep tapping away. A good example of that is the emergency department, where things are very template driven, and in fact the template drives a lot of quality of not missing something because your patient's got a stroke, you got to check for dysphagia. Well, maybe if I didn't have the check for dysphagia on my piece of paper, I wouldn't remember to check for dysphagia, and then some bad thing would happen. So there are use cases that may not fit as well, especially that are templated. But at scale, we have 500 physicians, 493 to be exact, that are enrolled in our tool, and I would say at least half of them are using it regularly. We have overall 3,500 physicians in the system. So this is mostly employed, but also non-employed physicians, but they're in our network. So the way we have it is they get to benefit from this tool as well. That's a huge win for them to be in our network. They get some of the rates that we have. Now they get some of the tools that we have. It's better when they're in our network because there's a lot better coordination of care, and we believe that we provide great quality in terms of what we're doing. So keeping a patient in a network means that we're doing what we think is best for the patient. And having these tools that attract people into the network is useful. Where we're going next is finding the next use case. So letting the ambient listening identify its own innovation by virtue of the fact that I don't have licensing problems that are preventing people from using it. So I can say, whoever wants it can use it. All right, where does it go next? Does it go to the OR as a medical black box? Does it go to the social worker to be able to identify patients that are at risk, vulnerable patients at risk of being kind of, fall between the cracks in the healthcare system? Where does it go next? And I think I want to make sure that it's embedded into Epic in our case, and make sure that it's available on a mobile device, and make sure I have all the support systems around it before I kind of really go at scale. But I'm confident enough now to know it's working and people like it and it's deriving value. And in fact, we have all kinds of dimensions that we're measuring. So the other really important aspect of this is to make sure before you go into it, to make sure we understand, okay, what are we measuring about it? And, and what sources are we using to measure that? So Epic has something called Epic Signal that kind of keeps track of all kinds of parameters on the user, but it's also pre and post surveys. It's also, the company themselves are going to have their own measures of when people are using it and in what circumstance. Pulling all that together to make that ROI case, to show that you're seeing more patients compared to other providers, or that your notes are capturing more E&M codes compared to other providers that are not using it. I think those measures and metrics are going to be important as well to kind of set up to grow, go back to the board and say, this is what we bought, this is what we got out of it. Here people seem to be satisfied with it. Let's do more of that.
I think it's a really strategic approach and a really calculated approach. I mean, when we started this interview, when you spoke about it, in more of a maverick type approach, but as I got to know you more today and hear the story, I think that that's a really savvy strategic way of approaching this.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you sharing all that. Before we go, everyone listens. All of our listeners love this lightning round. This is people's favorite thing to tune in for, to get to know you more as a person. So we have some quick questions, really quick 30-second answers, just whatever comes to your mind, and some less work-related questions. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. If you could vacation or live anywhere in the world, where would that be and why?
Vanuatu in the South Pacific. Because I'm a big sailor. I love water. I love transparent water. I just imagine that that's just a really cool place to go, where there's not a lot going on. It's very peaceful. If you had a boat and you were there, just enjoying nature and the folks that are living on those islands, eating fruit and stuff like that, that would be kind of really cool.
That sounds great. I'll write that one down. What is your favorite vehicle or dream car?
So I'd have to say it's got to be electric in my mind. Something that has, great range. I've always been a fan of the Tesla Roadster. That seems like a pretty amazing car. Not necessarily that practical, maybe, but interesting. Fast, rocket-like.
Adam, any comment?
I'll probably have to dub a comment in later.
Outside of your current company and role, what is the next big problem you think is most worthy to solve?
So, I read that question, and the thing that jumped into my head was anxiety. And what I mean by anxiety is, I've noticed with social media in the past 10 to 20 years, I've seen my kids and so forth, and the way they interact and social creatures with their friends and so forth. Despite the fact that we're all apparently more connected, the level of anxiety seems to be going up, not down. The frenzy of the world, the extremism seems to be going up, not down. I don't know if it's because negative information communicates faster than positive information, but there's something about it that means that we ought to pay attention to how do we make sure that we enjoy this world and keep giving to our brothers and sisters everywhere, as opposed to worrying about what's going to happen in the world. And I think anxiety is an important thing to try to cover.
No, I love that one. Speaking about the stress in our busy worlds, you're obviously, a busy person who has a lot of meetings and a lot of things in your personal and business life. What is one of those efficiency unlocked life hacks, efficiencies, whether in real life, an app, computer, something in your personal life or work life? It doesn't have to be informatics related, but something that you use to, be more efficient.
So, yeah, it's, I spend a lot of time in my inbox because that's a lot of the way, we communicate. And one thing that I found super helpful is a simple rule in Outlook. And all it does is says, for all incoming email, look for the word unsubscribe. And it takes all those emails and puts them in a folder. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to ignore them, but it means that in the CAN-SPAM Act, the stuff that doesn't have an unsubscribe, that's unsolicited, goes into the junk folder for the most part. The stuff that does have an unsubscribe, well, that makes it through the various filters. But if I have my rule that says unsubscribe and puts it into that folder, then the only thing that really end up in my inbox are things that are really intended for me. And I can go through the unsubscribe folder much faster than I would if I were just going to go in through my inbox, making sure I'm not missing something from my CEO, whatever it may be. That's been a pretty nice life hack.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, email rules is a hack in itself, let alone giving them a great way to use rules in a different way. That's great. Last question. What technology are you most concerned about containing in the future?
Well, the obvious answer here is AI, but I mean, when Skynet wakes up, well, they'll be laughing at us as we're busily trying to build it, as people worry that they're going to annihilate us. I just don't think that's actually the technology that's going to really get us. I'm much more worried about, if you think about all the scientific discoveries that have been made, nuclear fusion, and other kind of major physics transformations that have occurred. Obviously the atom bomb being one manifestation of what we've learned in terms of E equals MC squared. It's something that, whoops, we just opened up a wormhole and the world disappeared. It's more like that, like an accidental over the night, Higginbottom type of, element that we just didn't think about, that we stumble upon, and then whoever discovers it, by the way, in the universe disappears. So, that's when things end and everything kind of starts up again. I actually worry more about that than the things that I'm aware of and looking around, every day that we're looking at.
No, thank you so much. That was a great interview, a great lightning round. I enjoyed getting to know you today and learning about what you do. It's really impressive. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Efficiency Unlocked, Nerd Tested, MD Approved, a Nerd MD's podcast by Drs. Adam Carew and Dale Gold.